give us today our daily bread is because we know that God will come through with that, right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's like, we should say it with fervor, with some zeal, you know, put some zeal behind it.
All right.
Know?
Yeah.
You know,
it's a promise. So
it's a promise.
We can
Right.
expect it. This is Unhurried, and I'm your host, Doug Kyle. You know, life can feel like a race, rushing to the next thing, never time to reflect. But there is incredible value in slowing down with God to take in His perspective, His presence, His pace. How do we unlock the power of empathy? And if we do, how will that impact our relationships? This is episode 20 of season 2 of Unhurried. I can't believe it. 20 episodes already. I'm your host, Doug Kyle, and the topic today is the power of empathy. Welcome to our listeners, our viewers. Of course, Ryan is in the studio here with us. Good to see you again.
Of course. Yeah. You too.
Yeah. I want to begin by just, conveying my heartfelt, sorrows and condolences to you for the Maple Leafs.
Yeah.
Last week we made a big deal about you wearing two Maple Leaf. This is not a Maple Leaf hat.
It is. I'm wearing it backwards today.
Okay. Which is very symbolic,
yes,
right?
It is.
Your Maple Leafs lost last night.
Yes, they did.
And
yes.
We're talking about empathy, and it would be completely inappropriate if I did not begin by telling you I'm sorry.
Yes, yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
It was a rough game. We had a lot of ups and downs, more downs in the game than I would have liked, but it was fine. We were riding, the whole game with our emotions, and like I said, we had some highs and some lows, and then there's probably like a minute left on the clock, and the announcers, they're doing their job. You know what I mean? Like, you can't blame them. And they just keep showing sad Leaf fans in the audience and outside, and because it was in Toronto, so they had the big square, in downtown Toronto and stuff, and one of the announcers goes, he's like, that's it, there's, no, the Leafs are done for the season. And my son at that point turned around and looked at me, and the water, the
floodgates opened.
They just completely opened, and the tears just ran down his face as he's holding on to his, Austin Matthews jersey, and he has his Austin Matthews shirt on, and it's just like, oh man, it was rough for him to experience that. And, and he's just like, I just love the Leafs so much. And I'm just like, well, you can. That's part of, sports, is that, your team wins sometimes and you lose sometimes. Like,
man.
The up and down happens,
Yeah. I never watch hockey, but we've been talking about it on this, on the podcast. Yeah. So I thought I should catch this game. It's Game 7. I should catch it. Sure. We saw the last period, and I was feeling for you and for your son, who I knew was going to take it hard too. Yeah,
he took it. He probably took it the worst, of all of us, which made it sadder for me too. Sure. I'm like, I'm used to, we've been, around for a long time. So, you ride the ups and the downs of all your team, and it's like, so I'm like, all right, loss, doesn't feel good. You don't like it, but, you're like, all right, well, we'll take the summer. You bounce back, and it's just like, my son is just living every moment of it, so, and I think this is like his first, like season of being, kind of aware of the wins and the losses and understanding all of that, how it goes, so yeah.
Well, we'll get further into this topic of empathy, but that really captures it. It's a parent who cares about their kids' emotions, and you kind of enter into it with them, and that's what empathy actually is all about. Yeah, but I also know it's a little bit heartbreak for you too. So
yes, well, very much so. Yeah,
my condolences.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Well, we say that Unhurried. I've got my mug here, and they say Unhurried is like sitting down having a cup of coffee. together after a sermon, or tea. Could be tea. It could be
Sure.
water. Could, whatever your comforting beverage of choice is. First thing in the day when you're starting your day off. I actually, for a long time, was a big tea drinker,
Yes.
and now am kind of a combination of tea and coffee. But there's this quote that I really love about tea, and I think it applies to the podcast as well. So that's why I'm bringing it out. In 1946, a guy named George Orwell wrote an essay. It was called "A Nice Cup of Tea," and I love this. It's just so British. It's just hilarious to me. But here's how he describes having a cup of tea. He said, and it's funny in the article because he's kind of making a distinction between Chinese tea and Indian tea, because those are the two places that tea primarily comes from. And he says Chinese tea is okay, but he really prefers Indian tea. And he describes it this way. He describes it: if you drink tea, it makes you feel wiser, braver, and more optimistic after drinking it. And I love that. Wiser, braver, more optimistic. So actually, at one point, I had a mug that I made, a homemade mug. Well, actually, I ordered it online, but I designed it myself and ordered it online, where it had like 3 levels. Like, if you can imagine a coffee cup with marks down the side, depending on how much you drank of the tea. And about 1/3 of the way down, it said wiser.
Yeah.
And then another third down, it said braver.
Sure.
And then the bottom third said more optimistic. And it was one of those cups. Have you seen these where they change colors with the warmth?
Yes. Yeah.
So when you put tea in there, the whole thing would turn. It would go from white to black. It would turn black, and you couldn't see any of the letters. But as you drank it, it would go down, and these letters would appear.
Yeah. Nice.
And so I drink about a third of my tea, and I go, I'm feeling wiser.
Nice.
And then, another third, I'm feeling braver. And then, you get to the bottom of the cup, I'm feeling more optimistic.
Did you ever watch the show Ted Lasso?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Do you remember his quote about tea?
No. No, I don't.
Okay, so I pulled it up because I wanted to make sure.
All right.
Okay,
Say it. What
it's
is it?
the literal complete opposite. He goes, and I quote, this is Ted Lasso, and I quote, I always thought that tea was going to taste like hot brown water, and you know what? I was right. It's horrible. I love tea though, so I don't stand with Ted Lasso.
Yeah,
so.
That's funny. Yeah. That's funny. Well, whether you're more in that camp or in our camp,
sure.
When it comes to tea, I love the process of just thinking about going from wiser to braver to more optimistic.
For sure.
The idea that it sort of comes with time as you kind of sip away. You're feeling, the caffeine's starting to kick in. I'm feeling wiser, braver, more optimistic.
Yes.
Well, hopefully that's what happens with this podcast.
Yeah,
that's my goal. That's why it's Unhurried, that we just drink it in, take time to absorb what we talk about, kind of reflecting on a deeper dive of what we talked about on Sunday mornings, and people. Hopefully it makes people feel wiser.
Yeah.
Maybe even a little braver.
Yes.
Maybe even a little more optimistic.
Yes.
By the time we're done.
That's the hope. Yeah.
That's the hope. So anyway, we've got actually a couple listener questions that I'm really excited about, but we're going to save them to the end.
Yeah, cool.
That's been a nice add to our podcast here. But today I want to talk about the power of empathy and how valuable that is. And it comes out of what we talked about on Sunday. We looked at really kind of more of a negative example. We looked at the friends of Job in the book of Job, and it was a massive section of the book. Actually, kind of covered about 36 chapters on Sunday morning.
Yeah.
So that was we rapid fire through that section.
Yeah.
But we see mostly with Job's counselors that they missed the mark when it came to really being there for Job. They did well at the beginning because they came and they just sat and they didn't say a word. But as soon as they opened their mouth, that's when things went south. And the problem is that they wanted to correct Job. They came in the middle of his suffering, and they wanted to balance him out and to show him his shortcomings and make him realize that he was clearly off base. They came from a worldview, we talked about this a little bit last week, but they came from a worldview that believed that all suffering was a punishment for sin. And so since he had such intense suffering in his life, he must have done something really, really terrible to deserve the suffering that he was going through. And they spend the whole time really trying to convince Job that he was out of line and, missing the mark with God.
Yeah.
And so they're really, in many ways, they became a negative example of what not to do when we're trying to comfort our friends or when we're looking for comfort ourselves in the midst of difficult times. We're on good ground when we say that it was inappropriate what they did, because at the end of the book, in chapter 42, the last chapter of Job, God rebukes those three friends and says, "You have not spoken the truth about me, as my servant Job has." And so God himself rebukes them for their approach of coming in and trying to balance them out. They would have done so much better if they would have just been empathetic. They would have come in and just brought empathy into the situation. Maybe a little bit like you were with your son last night at the game. Wrapping their arms, you wrapped your arms around him and just comforted him. Right? That's so much more powerful than kind of coming in and trying to correct people.
Right. Well, I remember you even, I don't know if I'm stepping on your toes if you're going to bring it up or not.
Go for it.
Of when you were doing your I can't remember now that it left me. I'm sorry. But the where you asked when you were doing like the chaplain.
The story about the chaplain.
Yes, and you said, you were
give me some words.
Give me some words.
Yes.
At least I have in my back pocket or something. Yeah. And he said sometimes you just don't have anything to say.
He says it's not important what you say.
Right.
The important is just being there.
It's just being there. You know what I mean? Yeah. That came to mind. With my son and I last night. And also I thought that was so great because Job's friends did that at first. They just sat there with him, and then, when they started talking, they kind of messed it up a little bit.
We if you don't have something to say, maybe it's better not to say anything.
Yes. The wise philosopher Thumper once said, if you have nothing nice to say, don't say anything at all. So.
There's something like that in the Proverbs too. So
exactly.
It goes back a long way. That's so Thumper and Solomon.
Yes, exactly.
Thumper and Solomon have something to say about that. Well, what is the secret to empathy? How would we be different in our relationship with one another? And why do we resist it? Because I think there's something in us that kind of err on the side of Job's friends.
Yes.
I feel like what Job's friends did, we can find fault with it, but we do the same thing many times.
Yes. Well, we want I think we talked about it last week a little bit too, where it's like we want answers. We want answers. We want something to say. We want not someone to blame, but in the sense of someone to have accountability for something that has happened. Right. You want an answer for it. You want to wrap it up in a nice package with a bow and be like, this is why this happened.
This is why.
Yeah.
And sometimes that why is so that we can avoid it ourselves.
For sure.
We're saying, I don't want to go through what they're going through. So if I can explain why, then I'll just take a different path.
Right.
But empathy was a much better approach in those situations. So I want to talk a little bit about how we do that. At one point, I need to say that I think empathy is both natural and learned. Some people are just naturally empathetic. That's, there's people in my life that come to mind that are just so good at this, and I just watch what they do and I just marvel and I go, wow, that's incredible how naturally empathetic they are. But even if that's not your natural bent, even if that's not how your knee-jerk reaction in the midst of situations, I think we can learn to be more empathetic. And so here's really the point of what I want to say in this podcast in a sentence. It's this. So often we try to help people by balancing them out when what they really need is empathy.
Yeah.
What they really need is us to come alongside and connect with their feelings right where they are rather than balancing them. And a key passage for this is in Romans 12, 15 and 16. It says, rejoice with those who rejoice and mourn with those who mourn. Live in harmony with one another. Don't be proud. Be willing to associate with people of low position. Do not be conceited. Incredibly, Paul connects pride with us, our inability to really empathize with people and to rejoice when they're rejoicing and weep when they're weeping. The reason we often don't do that is because of pride. We sort of think, oh, we know better, or our perspective is better than their perspective, and we're trying to balance them out rather than really taking the time to enter into what they're experiencing, what they're going through. One translation says this, it says, laugh with your happy friends when they're happy and share tears when they're down. And that's part of our call as believers, is to really identify the emotions and the feelings of the people that we're around and really enter into them with them. To me, it's a very different, don't you think, than what Job's friends did?
Yes, very much so. Yeah,
it's kind of the exact opposite.
Yeah, they could have. I think, like I said, they started off strong,
Yeah.
you know, and I think they were trying to, put answers. I think, like you said earlier too, they were trying to see what they could do to not be in Job's position. So I think they were also trying to ask questions, or even, like one of the, in one of the passages, it's like God must be teaching you something, or trying to teach you something, so it's like they're trying to, I think, figure out how to avoid it, what landmines they have to avoid, when in actuality, sometimes you just have to really just sit and be present, and just be there for somebody,
Yeah, exactly. Well, so I think sometimes we do just the opposite of what this verse says. Instead of, rejoicing with those who rejoice and weeping with those who weep, we rejoice with those who weep and we weep with those who rejoice. And that is we it's what I call the teeter-totter tendency. And that is when other people are up, we go down. And when they're down, we go up. We're trying to balance them rather than connect with them. And it's just a natural tendency for us to do this. Let me just talk a little bit about how we do this. We often, instead of reflecting their emotion, we do the exact opposite. If they're down, we say, cheer up.
Right.
We say, oh, cheer up. It's not so bad. We want to, and if they're up, maybe a little too up and a little too optimistic, we say, calm down. Right. Yeah. We're always, we're on the opposite side. If they're scared, we say, it's nothing. It's no big deal. And if they're tired, we say, wake up, come on, get alert. It's like we're always trying to balance them out. It's a teeter-totter principle. Wherever they are, we go the opposite direction. And it's really natural in human relationships. Now that we talk about this, I challenge you to think about it, because it happens all the time. With especially with those we care about. Yeah. When we care about them and their emotions, sometimes we find ourselves going the opposite direction rather than meeting them right where they are. It's just really human nature. I do a lot of premarital counseling, and this is something that's I see all the time in couples too. This tendency to kind of go the other direction, and it feels good. It feels like this is what they need, but in fact it backfires on us.
Yeah. I think that's I've never thought about it that way. I'm just thinking back in, situations I've been through, and, people that have, tried to, like I said, it's hard because it's like, I think people try to be helpful, and you want to be, right? Like, I don't think, not everyone, but I'm making a general, assumption, but it's like, I think most people do want to be helpful, right? When someone is going through something hard. Yeah, they do. I think they want to be helpful. But it's like sometimes, even things that I've done or said, and you're just like, oh man, like maybe I should have just given it a beat, and I think maybe just taking that beat, being with somebody, letting them kind of go through their own thought process of what they're going through. I think that's more meaningful to show, empathy in that way,
Right. It's mirroring their feelings rather than trying to change them right away.
Yes.
And I think you make a good point. Most people do this out of good motives.
Yes.
Which is why the message we talked about on Sunday was, this is bad advice from good friends.
Yes.
This is stuff that good people try to do. These are people that really, these guys really cared about Job.
Oh, very much so.
They made a commitment to say, let's put our lives on hold to go be with him.
Yeah.
And so they're there out of genuine concern, and yet they were well-meaning, but they weren't helpful.
Right.
And Job kind of calls them miserable comforters. He goes, you guys are bad at this comforting thing.
Yeah.
It's just, you need to rethink that.
Yes.
Because the way you're doing it is not working.
It's not great. Yeah.
So if we go back to the passage in Romans, right after it says rejoice with those who rejoice and mourn with those who mourn, it says live in harmony with one another. And that word harmony there, when it says live in harmony, literally means be like-minded. And so that's the idea of mirroring their feelings, being like-minded. We come alongside and say, how are you feeling? And as we understand their feelings, we mirror those feelings. We meet them in them. That's what rejoicing with those who rejoice and mourn with those who mourn means. Instead, what we often do is we're different-minded. We it's a teeter-totter tendency. You're down, I'm going to go up, and vice versa. Right. But what God calls us to do is reflect their emotions and really mirror them so that they can they feel the sense of like, they're not alone. I've got someone that's in harmony with me, that's feeling what I'm feeling and going through what I'm going through. And empathy, literally, the word empathy literally means the same feelings, having the same feelings. So it's coming alongside and feeling what they feel and experiencing what they experience.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's so true. I think so many times we try to, like you were saying earlier, we try to balance them out. It's like they go low, we go high, and vice versa. And so much, of our ability as humans to be like-minded and to be in harmony is just to be there for somebody, just to be that support system for them. And then also just be in that moment with them. It's okay to be sad, with somebody.
It is okay to be sad. Tim Keller, who, has a lot of wise things to say. He said that in the secular view, suffering is never seen as a meaningful part of life, but only an interruption. And we are often we're uncomfortable with people that are sad or discouraged or down or, devastated, but whether it's a, hockey loss or something a lot worse, we're uncomfortable with that. Yeah. And so that's part of what causes us to want to balance them out, is because we don't want to go there. And yet God clearly calls us to do that very thing.
Yeah.
I can imagine someone out there thinking right now, yeah, but you don't want to just leave them there. That seems like, aren't we supposed to be change agents, and aren't we supposed to, help people and be encouraging and bring them out of that and move them beyond that? Absolutely. But they're not opposites. One of the most helpful thing we can do for someone, the most serving thing we can do for them, the thing that will be a step in the right direction often is just meeting them there and feeling what they're feeling, rather than kind of almost scolding them for being there.
Right.
And calling them out of it. They're probably going to recover better and bounce back, and if you meet them in their pain and in their hurt, as you enter in, that actually is one of the best ways to do it. Matter of fact, I have this great. It's my wife and I do this. It's become sort of almost like just a catchphrase or kind of a funny thing we say. And we know we're being we're being a little bit over the top with it. But it even though we know we're being over the top, it totally helps. If one of us is going, had a bad day or a bad situation, something difficult happened during the day, the other person will say, "Oh man, that's the worst. That's the absolute worst." We catastrophize it, Right. And we know it's not the worst.
Right.
There are worse things than that, but we it helps us actually feel better when the other person like takes it even deeper,
Yes.
catastrophizes it, and make it seem like this is the worst thing ever.
Right.
And it actually, when someone says that, you can kind of like, it softens it for you a little bit. Well, I guess it's not the worst thing ever, Could be at least,
Right.
I didn't, either the ticket wasn't worse, or it wasn't 2 flat tires, or whatever happened,
Yes. Yeah.
You go, at least it was only, but and instead of going, oh, there you go, see, it's pretty good, and then you want to balance them out, just go, no, it's still the worst, and it's actually helpful
Yeah.
to enter into it, and that's kind of more lighthearted, but the principle still applies, when you go into it and really, instead of trying to pull people out of it, just really enter into it. It actually does. It has a very therapeutic impact on the people.
Yes, it does. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. That's great. I think just, I think that's great. I love that. I think I'm going to adopt that. I think that's so good.
That's the worst. That's
Yeah.
the worst.
Yeah.
And even though we know we're not really saying it's the worst, it still helps.
Yes, it does. It does. Well, it helps to know that somebody's there with you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? When you're shoulder to shoulder with somebody, like just knowing, being a part of a team or even a church body or a small group or something, just knowing that somebody's there for you is really nice, and it can help you get through some really tough times, and just the little things that, just kind of stink sometimes, it can help you, for sure. It'll help you get out of that funk,
I feel like if we're looking for the best example of this, is that Jesus does this for us too.
Yes, very much so.
In one of, kind of all-time great passage in Scripture, one of a lot of people's favorite passage in Hebrews 4:15, it says, "For we do not have a high priest," talking about Jesus. We don't have a high priest who is unable to empathize with our weaknesses. There's that very word, empathize. But we have one who has been tempted in every way, just as we are, yet he did not sin. Amazingly, Jesus empathizes completely with our emotions. He's our mediator in heaven. He's the one that's able to really feel what we feel and express. I was really, really impacted by what you said earlier, Ryan, when you're talking about how, as a parent, seeing your son, kind of be heartbroken over the loss of his favorite hockey team, being, out of the playoffs and done with their season. As a parent, of course you feel that pain.
Yes. Yeah. For sure.
It's no longer like, oh, this is something I have to choose to do. This is just so natural. Right. And that's what Jesus does for us. He sees let's flip it the other way. He sees our joy and our great elation. And just like you, when you see your kids happy, it makes you so happy.
Oh,
right?
So happy.
And when you see them down and hurt and discouraged, it does the same for you too. It's just the most natural thing to do. And that comes from Jesus and God the Father who planted that in us as parents. It's just natural for us to do. Well, that makes sense because Jesus is this high priest who empathizes with our weaknesses. And he does that without compromising at all. It says he does it without sin. So if he does that perfectly. And so we should also feel like when we empathize with people, we're not compromising. We're not like, oh, I guess I'm, not telling them what they need to hear.
Right.
We're actually really modeling what Jesus does for us as the high priest in heaven.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so great. Yeah.
What's so cool about this, and this was to me, if I encourage people to hear the message if they didn't from Sunday, and if they did, as we're taking it deeper, the part of the message that floored me was how Job, even though his friends weren't that helpful, Job found that with God too. He was able to say that, and to me, one of the most illuminating parts of the book of Job is in chapter 16. And in verses 19 through 21, and Job says this to his friends. He says, "Even now, my witness is in heaven. My advocate is on high." Now, this is crazy because he didn't have the benefit that we have of the New Testament to help explain Jesus' role as an advocate in heaven. And yet somehow with, divine insight, God was able, maybe in the middle of his pain, God was able to convey this to him so that he knew that somehow this was true, that even now he had this witness in heaven. And the way he describes it really sounds exactly like Jesus, what the Bible tells us about Jesus. He goes on to say, "My intercessor is my friend. As my eyes pour out tears to God, on behalf of a man, he pleads with God as one who pleads for a friend." And to me, that describes Jesus perfectly. How much clarity Job had on that, we don't know, but there's something there that he understood about what was happening in heaven that gave him great comfort, knowing that God understood even if his friends didn't.
Yeah.
That God could sympathize, empathize with him in such a powerful way, even when his friends were unable to do that at all.
Right.
And I love that so much because, we know the part, many of us know the part early in the book of Job where Satan comes and accuses, Job in heaven. That is kind of this almost really provocative, hard to understand part of the story where Satan has access to God and comes in and he gains permission to go, pour out all these troubles on Job. So we have this accuser in heaven. We know that that's one of Satan's roles, is to accuse us. But Job was able to see that even greater than that, he had this advocate in heaven. And so do we. And if that's true of us and our pain, how much more do we want to do that for others too around us, the friends that we have around us as well?
Yeah, I also like the last point that you made on Sunday. And it was that instead of cliches, what we need are those who help us trust God when answers aren't easy. And I loved that because I think that so many times we have so many questions of, and we talked about this before, but it's like so many questions of, why did this happen? Why does this happen to these people? Or and all that. And it's like in showing Jesus in that way to our friends or to our families, we have to point them to God, who is our ultimate comforter in these times when questions aren't easy and they don't have easy answers, that you can just go, this is the answer. And there you go. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like to be that for somebody, to be that comfort for somebody, that's really what God does for us, and how Jesus does that for us too.
I think that's a really good point. Because imagine, and I had people come up to me after the message and say, yeah, that part about really being present and there with people, with kind of the idea was just, you didn't have to say anything, just be there with people, was a big point for them to take. But what you're adding is also important. We come and we be with them, we identify with their emotion, but we also trust God with them.
Yeah.
And we don't have to tell them, trust God, just have faith.
Sure.
We just become that person who comes alongside and trusts God with them in a way that is contagious.
Yeah.
That kind of invites them in. And I love the idea that there's been times in my life that it's been hard for me to trust God because I can't see how this is going to end well. And other people trust God for me and with me.
Yes.
And that eventually drafts me into that faith as well. And you realize that this faith adventure that we're called to is a group process. It's a community thing. It's meant to be communal in that sometimes I can't do it, but others can do it for me. Sometimes I'm going to do it for them.
Right. Well, I just love the part where, it's like we have an advocate, who defeated the grave for us, but is still fighting for us. Like, I just love that reassurance, even like you were saying in Job's, world at that time, he didn't have the benefit of the New Testament. It's like we have the Old Testament and the New Testament, and we still have the God of today, that's still fighting for us, and I just love that reassurance of that, of just going like, yeah, we can get through this, like it's hard, but the answers aren't always easy. But we can get through this.
And just the way you express that, I mean, how meaningful would that be for someone going through a tough time to kind of say what you just said?
Yeah.
We have the God of the Old Testament. We have the God of the New. We have the God of today.
Right.
And that's who we're going to cling to right now in the middle of this one when the answers aren't easy.
Yeah.
Otherwise.
Yeah.
We're gonna cling there. Yeah. Job is kind of amazing because he has this in chapter 16. I just mentioned that insight into the advocate at heaven. He also has the famous line in there that I don't even know if people know. This comes from the book of Job, but he says, "I know that my Redeemer lives."
Yes. Yeah.
And like songs kind of
Yes.
are built
Yeah,
around
for
that
sure.
phrase and
Yeah.
everything. It comes from Job. How does he know that?
Yeah.
Again, this isn't only before the New Testament. This is before the Old Testament was written.
Yes.
A lot of people think it's the oldest book in the Bible.
Yeah.
So there's nothing, but he had this God gave him this incredible insight.
Yes, very much so.
Sometimes those deep insights come from some suffering.
Yes, yeah. It's been a real I don't know if you've experienced this at least on Sundays, but it's been a real emotional series for our church family.
I think so too.
Yeah, I've gotten a lot of great stories, like from people that have come to our church. Also, a lot of great stories and some shared suffering, that I know that we're, people are going through too. So, it's been a really great series to kind of remind ourselves that Job went through something very, very tragic, but still his eyes never faltered from what God was doing in his life, and how he redeemed him, how he was, our advocate, our comforter, all of those things. He never, even with bad advice from good people, he never faltered from that.
Yeah. Hopefully that's true of our podcast followers as well. That, I bet that is true. I bet for those who are following along on the podcast, it really is something that they can cling to, hold on to, and connects in a deep way. I'm really hoping that this concept, these ideas are things that stick with us and we can go back to and realize, I think we know that Job was given to us for a reason. I think it's a lot of this for us to really understand that God meets us in that, and he invites us to bring those struggles to him as an empathetic Savior. That we have.
Very much so.
Well, we have some. I've got some listener questions, and I don't know. I could have saved one of these for next week, but I don't know. I like both of them. I didn't know which one to choose, and one of them we've kind of dealt with a little bit. So I think we can do the first one pretty quickly. But so the whole thing. We have a couple mugs left.
Okay.
These mugs are still going pretty well, and we only have a couple left. So, but. The mugs have created a little bit of a buzz in the lobby. I was carrying mine around on Sunday, and a couple of people came up to me and clanked their mug against mine, as if to just say, like, we know we're insiders in the Unhurried podcast world. But this question was from one of our regular listeners. He said, I just wrote the whole thing down. He says, lastly, a question. He kind of talked about how much he appreciated you and me and the conversations that we're having. And then he said this, lastly, a question. What determines a left or right-handed mug? I love how much research he did.
Yes.
I looked at what is left of all my mugs I've collected, and most of them have an emblem writing on both sides, and most of them have something different on each side. I'm assuming that you're referring to the mugs have something on one side as being a right-handed or left-handed mug. I do have a couple mugs with something on one side, but each one is different. One showing the emblem of the drinker, and the other away to one towards the drinker and one away from the drinker. Is that the preference? And then he did this. I love this. An internet search explained that only the ergonomics of holding the mug determined if it's left or right-handed.
Wow.
So this guy went deep into the internet to find what is the difference.
Does he want to work here? With this level of search, ability.
All right. Well, he's probably listening. Well, we can follow up and see if he's interested. But he took it seriously. So So here's what I mean by left-handed. I mean, when I hold the mug with my left hand, the writing on it, I can see it.
Okay.
So if you notice, I'm particularly talking about those that only have it on one side. If they only have it on one side, it's almost always so that the right-hander can see it. And so it's meant to be for the drinker, not the drinkee.
Yes.
Is that the phrase? I don't know. It's meant to be for the person sipping the coffee, not for the one who's watching you sip the coffee.
I thought of the word spectator, but I'm like, who's drinking in front of an audience?
Yeah.
I don't know, right?
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah.
that's probably more confusing than helpful, but that's all I mean. Now, it's interesting if there's some ergonomic differences. I don't know. That's
Right.
way outside of
Yeah.
my level of expertise.
Yeah. See, I always thought that, and I'm more of a cold drinker kind of a guy. Like I like cold cold coffee
beverages.
or cold beverages. So I don't drink a lot of hot beverages. And so I always thought that the logo facing out, that meant that it was,
That was the correct way.
that was the correct way.
No, it's actually, and the way you know this is because we look at ones that only have it on one side. It's made for those.
It's made for the right hand.
for the right hand person
Interesting.
seeing it, them seeing it.
Right. Right.
Them being reminded.
Interesting. Yeah.
So we did ours on both sides.
Right.
Unhurried's on both
Right.
sides by design. You can think of it as more like it's left or right-handed, or you could also think of it as more like it's for me and for others.
And for others. Right.
You know,
right.
it's both looking outward as well as looking inward.
To encourage people to be unhurried and have an unhurried conversation. You know?
I am so surprised how many comments and I'm getting about the left-handed part of this. So that's super funny to me. But here's another question, and this is the one I thought is actually, the more I thought about it, the more I thought,
Sure.
that actually is kind of a deep question. So people have been uncomfortable with the expression. We've told them on here if they want their mug, they have to find us on Sunday morning and say, hey, give me my mug. And so many people have said that I have a hard time just demanding a mug. You know, it feels
not everyone. Some
Not
people,
everybody.
I think some people have had a lot of fun with
They
it.
go, finally permission to be rude.
Permission granted.
Permission granted. But a lot of people have commented about it. I feel awkward saying it that way or whatever.
yeah.
But then one person who used the expression also said, she said, I also felt uncomfortable saying that, but then I noticed that in the Lord's Prayer, Jesus taught us to say, give us today our daily bread.
Yes.
Give us today our daily bread.
Yeah.
And so here's her question. Her question is, how do you think we're supposed to say that?
Yeah.
You know, does he want us to say, I'll let you answer this question.
Sure.
Do you think he wants us to say, like, demand, like in a, I deserve it, or not I deserve it, but you promised it, so
Right.
I'm banking on the promise. Give me,
Yeah.
or give us our daily bread, or is it more, please give me? What do you think?
I think it was more the first, like kind of the way you said it. I think it's the confidence, I think, is what he was trying to say to us. You know, give us today our daily bread, is because we know that God will come through with that, right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's like, we should say it with fervor, with some zeal. You know, put some zeal behind it.
All
you
right.
know?
Yeah.
You know,
It's a promise. So
It's a promise.
We can
Right.
expect it.
right. If
Yeah.
God did it before, he's going to do it again.
Yeah.
You know,
There's
so
a song like that.
Yeah, exactly. That's
Yeah.
what I'm saying. To
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Give us our bread. Say it with some zeal.
All right.
You know?
There you go. I like it.
Yeah.
I'll take it. I think that's a good answer.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's not like he said, give us our, this abundance, like, give me, decadence.
Right.
It's like
Right.
our daily bread. This
Yes.
is just my basic needs, my necessities.
Right.
We
Right.
can expect him to provide for his
Yes.
children.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we can. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Just as our kids would expect, meals to be on the table and their food to be provided, so we can expect God to provide for us.
Right.
So,
Now, whether they eat it or not, that's on them, because that's a daily struggle.
that sounds like it's close to home right there.
Yes. Or
Yeah.
for all the parents out there, it's a daily struggle.
Well, the funny thing about that question, how do you think Jesus wanted to say it? It actually led to, I heard about it from both this couple, both the husband and the wife, told me separately, and apparently it created a little bit of tension there. They had some differing opinions on that. So
nice.
hopefully they're both listening, and I can say that Ryan has answered the question for you. So he is definitively giving the answer, and so whichever one of you.
I hope I was right with the wife.
I think you were.
Nice.
I think you're gonna win points with her.
All
yeah.
right, cool.
Yeah. Well, no matter what, if the husband's suffering now, we empathize with you.
Right.
We feel your pain.
Suffering.
Suffering.
The
yes.
three rings.
The three rings. We are feeling your pain.
Yes,
we're
we're there.
empathizing with you. And anyway, I hope that we all of us, you and Ryan, you and I, and our listeners will think differently about how we approach the people around us in their joy and in their pain and their high points and their low points, to be able to put our feelings aside and really be like-minded with them, to enter into it, not try to balance them out so quickly, but rather to really enter in.
Right.
To be there with them in the middle.
Right.
That's really the secret of empathy, and empathy is, it's amazing. I mean, I think there's scales out there that really measure empathy, and it's one of the best things you can do for your relationships.
Yeah.
It's one of the best things you can bring to your family and friends and those you care about.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, just to point them to God, to point them there, and then let God do the rest, to be that comfort for them. But we know that we have an advocate that fights for us, so, and that's kind of what we're supposed to do. Just point them up,
If you want to see if you want to get a sense of what this message, what we're talking about today came from, it comes from a message that I gave on May 18th in 2025 called Bad Advice from Good Friends. You can get that. You can listen to it. I'll listen to it again at greenvalleychurch.com. Thanks, Ryan, for being here. This is always fun. Always great to talk this through with you.
Thank you, Doug.
Thanks to our weekly enthusiastic viewers and listeners who are following along. Until next time, this has been Unhurried with me, your host, Doug Kyle, and I look forward to talking soon.